Well, I think it's 5 o'clock, everyone. So we'll go ahead and get started today. My name is Jessica Leger, and on behalf of the University of Louisiana System's third cohort of the Management and Leadership Institute, we'd like to welcome all of you. We appreciate your patience, and we're so glad that you managed to join us tonight, given hurricane disruption and our rescheduling at the semester's busiest point. But if the wonderful year of 2020 has taught us anything, we've all learned to adjust and pivot, right? But before we introduce Dr. Beverly Daniel Tatum, we'd like to share the impact of our last book club where we discussed Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye to show you how participating right now actually matters. To begin, Dr. Ardrell Pinkney from UNO will share how the discussion impacted her work along with her colleagues.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Yes, great. Okay, I'll get started. In The Bluest Eye, Toni Morrison writes, each member of the family in his own cell of consciousness, making his own patchwork quilt of reality, collecting fragments of experiences here, pieces of information there. From the tiny impressions gleaned from one another, they create a sense of belonging and try to do with the way they found each other. That statement, combined with the thought-provoking discussion with members of the Universities of Louisiana Book Club, left an indelible impression into the fabric of who I am and how I interact with others. A sense of belonging. Pecola breedloves search for a sense of belonging. And if we're honest with each other, we all want to belong. With that now in mind, my colleagues and I are more aware of the whispers of our students. We listen with our eyes, and like forensic scientists, we search for clues to discover the needs and aspirations of our students. More importantly, we give space to them to speak power to the things which affect them in school, the home, and the world. Our TRIO staff members are now even more dedicated to serving our students. We are committed to building confidence by reflecting the glass half full approach to classroom assignments. For example, absences are met with a personalized contact. I missed you today, via telephone call or a text message. As a dedicated staff, we can't make do with the way we found our students. Our students are important, and we must provide them with the holistic resources necessary to reach their fullest potential. Who would have thought one novel, Into the Soul of a Little Girl's Desire to Have Blue Eyes, could ignite a firestone? But isn't that why we read, seek knowledge, and join a book club?
Thank you so much, Dr. Pinkney. We truly appreciate the personal touch that you and your staff are providing to your students. Next up, we would like to hear from Dr. Pat Moyer, who is from Southeastern University.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to share some of the work that we're doing at Southeastern. As Jessica said, my name is Patrick Moyer, and I'm the department head in the Department of Chemistry and Physics at Southeastern Louisiana University. The UL System Book Club was perfect timing for us because it accelerated some intentional work we're doing in our department on improving the culture in our department with regard to diversity, inclusion, and belonging. Chemistry and physics are two fields in which women and Black students are underrepresented, which is just not acceptable to us. Dr. David Norwood is a physics faculty member in our department, and he has driven this initiative in our department. Last year, pre-pandemic, we invited Dr. Willie Rockford to campus to meet with us and some alumni. Dr. Rockford is a native Louisiana and actually played football at Grambling University. He's the president of the Society of Black Physicists, and he is the department head at Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland. This past semester, Dr. McCarthy, our dean in our department, contracted Dr. Monica Sylvain to do some discussion groups with our former and current students of color, and to meet with our faculty to begin to identify and to bring to light biases that exist individually and collectively within our department. We're now in the process of taking her feedback and strategizing intentional and meaningful programming for recruiting students and faculty as well as internal professional development activities. So we're grateful for the timeliness of this group in accelerating and informing our department's work along these lines.
Thank you, Dr. Moyer. We really appreciate the meaningful work that you and your colleagues are doing. At this time, I'd like to share my own personal experience from my university, the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. Shortly after we concluded our last book club meeting, I was encouraged to find a way to engage our freshman students in intentional conversations centered on social justice. When meeting with several colleagues who also teach a freshman transition course geared primarily towards student athletes, we collectively added a 3-day lesson on social justice to our curriculum. Reading The Bluest Eye together as a class turned out to be the perfect introduction for our discussion. The book discussion provided a background and platform that served as a natural segue for a diverse panelist discussion that allowed students to ask the difficult questions that surfaced as a result of our book review. Much like the book club was meant to provide a safe space and start hard conversations for all of us. Discussions included understanding stereotypes faced by individuals of different races, ethnicities, or genders, and how they seek to overcome perceived stereotypes. While students wanted to better understand the concept of voting for change and how to make protests productive, the book transmitted these lessons in the context of their discussions, which ultimately enhanced their buy-in and authentic adoption of these critical values. Students concluded our social justice series by writing reflections capturing their changed viewpoints. One student recognized that racism today is more subtle and harder to recognize. Another stated that since reading the novel The Bluest Eye, Toni Morrison undoubtedly made the outlook I have had on these issues become more crucial and really opened my eyes to understand that this world has had a wrong perception of social equality. Another recognized their ability to generate change within his own sphere of influence. My colleagues and I are grateful that the M&LI Book Club provided us with this framework to engage our freshman students in courageous conversations. We wouldn't have ordinarily thought of this approach, yet there's no doubt that these discussions had a lasting impact. As you can see, the impact on our system from just one simple book club discussion has been profound. For this and the tremendous growth taking place on all of our campuses, we would like to thank Dr. Henderson for his vision and his commitment to grow and empower leaders through the Management and Leadership Institute, and Dr. Ayub for her guidance and support. We are truly grateful. Dr. Henderson, you inspire us to work within multiple frames while always emphasizing the power of human capital. You encourage empathic leadership and you remind us to always empower our students. These ideals have brought us to this place where we can discuss books by world-renowned authors and extract principles and tactics that promote growth, both as individuals and collectively on our campuses. Thank you for your vision and for all that you do for the UL system. We would now like to turn our program over to you so that you can introduce Dr. Tatum.
Jessica, thank you very much. And Caprice, thank you for setting this up. And Dr. Tatum, thank you so much for joining us and for your flexibility. We had 5 named storms hit Louisiana this hurricane season, which was a first. But this was such an important conversation. We had to find a way to bring you back, and we're delighted to have you. The previous conversation around the Toni Morrison book was actually led by a faculty member within our system, Holly Stave, who is a professor of literature in the Louisiana Scholars College and one of the nation's most renowned Toni Morrison scholars. But for participants and class members tonight, you are in for just an extraordinary treat because we are joined by one of the preeminent leaders in psychology, especially in psychology and race, one of the preeminent leaders of higher education, and you are in for just a remarkable conversation. Dr. Tatum, we're so glad to have you here. And if I could, just briefly from her bio, Dr. Tatum is the president emerita of Spelman College. And if you're not familiar with Spelman College, it is probably the preeminent liberal arts college for women of African descent in the world. It is an extraordinary institution, and she led it for nearly 15 years. She's a clinical psychologist. She's known for her expertise on race relations. She's a thought leader in higher education. She's the author of several books, including the best-selling Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? And Other Conversations About Race. It's the 20th anniversary edition that we read. And it was so timely, but unfortunately, I'm afraid that she's going to have to update it now every 3 or 4 years instead of every 20. She is a sought-after speaker on topics of racial identity, development, race and education, strategies for creating inclusive campus environments, which is a conversation that we have been engaged in for some time now in Louisiana. 2005, she was awarded the prestigious Brock International Prize in Education for her innovative leadership in the field. She's a fellow of the American Psychological Association, was the 2014 recipient of the APA Award for Outstanding Lifetime Contributions to Psychology. She holds a BA degree in psychology from Wesleyan University and an MA and PhD degree in clinical psychology from the University of Michigan, as well as an MA in religious studies from Hartford Seminary. Over the course of her career, she served as a faculty member at the University of California, Santa Barbara, Westfield State University, and Mount Holyoke College. Prior to her 2002 appointment as president of Spelman, she served as the dean and acting president at Mount Holyoke College. In spring of 2017, she was the Mimi and Peter E. Haas Distinguished Visitor at Stanford University. She's married to Dr. Travis Tatum. They're the parents of 2 adult sons. Dr. Tatum, it is an honor to welcome you to Louisiana, even if it's virtually, and to the Management and Leadership Book Discussion. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Henderson, and I'm delighted to be with you. And I was feeling you with all those hurricanes, and so I'm glad we were able to find this date.
Yes, ma'am. Well, Dr. Tatum, your book is, of course, the seminal work, and it is, as we've been given some questions from the class we want to discuss, but if it's okay, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but I will, I'm known for that. I would like to ask you if you have any thoughts about what have happened in the 3 years since you finished this latest update to your book, and if you had started this update 3 years hence, if it would have taken a different approach.
I'm not sure I would have, actually, but thank you for asking, because, you know, when the book ends, where we are in our timeline is I finished it in the spring of 2017, not long after the inauguration of President Trump. So, you know, a lot of what happened in 2016 leading up to the election, some of the rhetoric that was certainly the rhetoric coming from the Trump campaign, the rhetoric coming from Hillary Clinton's campaign, the polarization that is so stark today, we could certainly see the beginnings of that in 2016. And the Black Lives Matter movement was certainly a factor in that 2016 campaign. It was being talked about, maligned by Donald Trump, endorsed by Hillary Clinton. But one of the things that's different, of course, COVID notwithstanding, I'll come back to COVID, but just looking at race relations, following the death of George Floyd, which again, even his death at the hands of police in Minnesota, Minneapolis, this past May, was one of a long list, actually, that I chronicle in the book. So that wasn't necessarily different. But I think, so in some ways, you know, all the things that I was writing about, the growing presence, visibility of white nationalist movements, Charlottesville had not happened yet when I wrote my book, but the, you know, the shooting in Charleston and at the church in Charleston, South Carolina, that had happened. And the march, the celebration of Donald Trump's election with a march down Pennsylvania Avenue shortly after his election, signaling, again, the more visible activity of white nationalist groups in the United States. All of that was captured in the prologue of my book. So in some ways, it was like the beginning of a wave that has built, but the wave was being described. So I'm not sure that I would really change that. But of course, COVID-19 has been really significant in a couple of ways. Of course, all our lives have been changed by COVID-19 and the pandemic. As we sit here talking over Zoom, you know, all our lives have been changed in some way. But the intersection of COVID and the murder of George Floyd was really, I think, significant in part because so many people were at home and able to see that video captured on screens, whether it was on their work laptops or their smartphones or their televisions. We were, as a nation, in some ways, a captive audience in a way that perhaps we might not have been under ordinary circumstances. You know, you might have heard about what happened on your drive home if you were listening to news in the car or something like that. But to have the visual image of his life being snuffed out in the way that it was, repeatedly shown over and over and over again, and we're all at home to see it, I think galvanized a response different than perhaps some of the other incidents of death at the hands of police had triggered. So I think that made a difference. Now, fast forward, you know, here we are, it's December 2020. We've been quarantining since March. And, you know, certainly that was not predicted or expected when I was writing my book, but certainly it has made visible some of the, in more stark ways, the disparities in our society, disparities in healthcare, that, you know, who's a frontline worker and why, you know, who has the shelter of home and bandwidth that's needed to work from home and who doesn't, all of those things could be amplified by what I was writing about, but they're all representative of the ideas I was talking about.
And I think that word amplification is exactly the right word. And you know, I had not thought about that perspective on George Floyd, that we were all seeing the video almost in real time.
Yes.
Collectively, right? And that does have a different impact. But
yes.
One of the questions that the group asked, and I'm gonna use Charlottesville maybe as a reference point for this. And we all remember the president's comments that there were good people on both sides, right?
Yes.
And for some reason, that comment did resonate with a certain part of the population. It would not be a part of the population that we would characterize as white nationalists, right? They're people sometimes that we even work with or we see in our churches. And so the question that was asked is, how do we respond to those who see dialogue centering on diversity, equity, and inclusion as in itself racist or divisive? And that can be a foreign conversation for us because we engage in these conversations all the time, but we see
yes.
a segment of the population that seems to be repelled by that.
Yeah. Well, you know, there are people who were raised to be what I'm going to reference as colorblind.
Yes.
You know, they will say, you know, I grew up in a household, we were taught to be colorblind. And what that meant typically was you shouldn't notice or comment on racial differences. This is a point of view that I have heard expressed more on the part of white citizens than people of color. But I'm thinking right now of a conversation I had as part, there's an initiative I write about in my book at the end called the Atlanta Friendship Initiative. And in this Atlanta Friendship Initiative, people are paired with people they don't know across lines of difference in an effort to create and expand social networks and allow people who might not otherwise know each other to get to know each other. And I have participated in this program, and I was matched with a white man. I grew up in Massachusetts. He grew up in Texas. He's a Republican. I'm a Democrat. You know, we are different in many ways, but we are about the same age. You know, children of the 50s, you know, both born I was born in 1954. I think he might have been born in 1955, but essentially, so we have that generational commonality. And when we were first meeting as part of this program, you meet with your partner for lunch and you talk about your growing up experiences. We were having this conversation. And one of the things that he said was, I was taught never to talk about race. And I said, well, you know, I write about it. You know, that's what I do all day long. That's what I do. But my partner in this project said, you know, we were taught just never to talk about it. We were supposed to be colorblind. You weren't supposed to notice. You weren't supposed to talk about it. And when, and that somehow it was wrong, to do so, that it was, cause conflict, right? It will cause conflict if you talk about these things. Certain things you're not supposed to talk about, race, religion, and politics. And so, so if that's been your socialization, if you've grown up, and that's not even to say that you were encouraged to have prejudicial attitudes or anything. It's just to say that if you were like my friend, growing up in an environment that said, we will be silent on this subject. And then you bring people together and say, we're going to talk about it a lot. You will trigger, I think, for some people, this sense of, this is a mistake. You're not supposed to do this. You're breaking some important social rule, particularly if you're asking me to do this at work and with people I have to see every day. And I think there is anxiety about that. So I wouldn't say that, to the person who says you're quote being racist because you're asking people to talk about these issues, I would have to ask, well, what do you mean by racist? How are you defining racist? But I often hear people say it's a bad idea because it's going to generate conflict, or it might generate conflict. And I think that has everything to do with the kind of socialization many people experienced growing up. You're on mute. You have to unmute.
Listen, we have been using Zoom now for almost a year, and we still, well, some of us have been slower to master it than others, but apologize. But what you just talked about, it's a perfect segue into the second question, and I want to pose the second question, but I want to add a little bit of a twist to it if I could. And their question was, what role does divisiveness play in the work of promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion? But to me, it relates back to what you were talking about, and also to the George Floyd case, in this idea of reactive anti-racism and proactive anti-racism.
Yeah.
And how the Floyd case was one that was so front and center, and it captured everyone's attention. It was very easy for all of us to be strong, reactive, anti-racist advocates. But as time passes, suddenly that becomes not as critical, and not at the forefront of everyone's mind.
Yes.
Right? And it's that proactive anti-racism that I think is what's necessary. But that's what is sometimes characterized as divisiveness. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on that.
Well, again, I think we have to, maybe I should spend a little time defining what is racism.
That would be wonderful, sure.
So I like to, and I do this in the book, as you know, there's a whole chapter where I'm defining terms. But one of the terms I define is prejudice, right? Prejudice, as we know, is, when we prejudge someone on the basis of limited information, often on the basis of stereotypes, we can say that we are, demonstrating prejudice, that we have internalized this misinformation and projected onto other people we haven't gotten to know yet. And we are all of us, vulnerable to this, to internalizing misinformation about people different from ourselves. One, because we grow up in largely segregated communities. Two, because it's so pervasive. It's around us. It's in the jokes people tell. It's in the television we watch. It's in the books we've read as kids. It's in the, popular culture in lots of different ways. It's so pervasive. I like to describe it, as I do in the book, as like smog, right? We are all breathing smog, not because we want to, but because it's the only air available. And if we understand that we are constantly being bombarded with information or misinformation about groups and people who are different from our own, or even sometimes about our own, we are internalizing those messages. You were talking about The Bluest Eye. The main character in that novel has internalized messages about what beauty is, which is why she's so keen to have those blue eyes, right? So we internalize the smog. As I like to say, if you breathe it in, you're going to breathe it out sometimes. Again, not intentionally, but when you least expect it, you might, have a little smog response that indicates some of that internalization. But prejudice, which we all have, again, because of our smog breathing, not because we want to or because we're bad people, but we've all internalized some misinformation about somebody. Who it is going to vary depending on where you grew up and all of that. But it's very likely that we all have it at some level. Some people have a lot, some people have a little, but we all have some. And, but racism is more than just prejudice. It's more than just, ideas. It's policies and practices and procedures that form a system that advantages one group over another. Now, when you say that racism is a system of advantage based on race, which is the definition I use in my book, there will be some white people who will say, I have not had any advantages in my life. I have had a hard life, grew up poor, worked hard. What advantages? What system of advantage? But if you know enough about how our economic system is working, how our education system is working, how the healthcare system is delivered, if you know enough about those things, you can see where the advantages are, even if you don't feel it every day. The advantage might simply be being able to go to a school and read a book that has pictures that look like you in it. That might be the advantage you got. The advantage might be being able to go shopping and not be followed around in the store. You might not notice that, but that might be an advantage you had. It might be driving home and not being worried that you're going to be pulled over and have a potentially lethal encounter with a police officer. That might be, the system of advantage manifests in lots of different ways, but often people are not aware of the way that the system is. Or is operating, because they haven't been taught to recognize it or to notice it. If we think about racism as that system, the image that I like to use and I describe in my book, many people tell me they find it helpful, is this system as like a moving walkway, like at the airport, where you step onto the walkway. I didn't turn the walkway on. You didn't turn it on. It was moving when I got there. But when you step onto that moving walkway, you're carried along by it. You don't have to do anything. You can stand still, and still it moves along and takes you from one end of the terminal to the other. There will be some people on that moving walkway who are actively engaging in the policies and practices that fuel it, that embrace it, that see, we might call them white supremacists, people who understand that this is what's happening and they welcome it. They're like the people who walk fast on the moving walkway. But there are other people who maybe don't even feel the walkway's moving so slowly they're not even aware of the motion, but they're just standing still. They're not calling anybody names. They're not doing anything offensive, but they're still participating in the system and they're still being carried along, even without their conscious awareness. And then there's some people who maybe feel the motion of that walkway, don't want to go where the walkway is going, and they will turn around as though they were going to be heading in the opposite direction. But unless they start moving, they're still traveling in that same direction. Now they're just traveling backwards and they don't see where they're headed. The only way to really interrupt this process, which is what I refer to as anti-racism, the only way to interrupt that process is to turn around and walk quickly in the opposite direction. If we're walking quickly in the opposite direction, then we can interrupt that forward motion. We can change the outcome. But if we're just standing still, even if we're not doing anything, we're still participating and in our silence reinforcing the cycle as it moves along. So if we think about, what is racist, I like to say racist should be thought of as an adjective, not a noun. That it's about behaviors, it's about policies, it's about practices. And those behaviors can either reinforce that cycle, we would call those racist behaviors, or they can interrupt the cycle. Those that are interrupting, we can call anti-racist behaviors, anti-racist policies, anti-racist practices. And so to the person who says these conversations are divisive or even racist, I would have to say, what definition of racism are you using? It doesn't match up to the one that I'm using. Maybe I'll pause there.
So I think that I'm so glad that because I was going to ask you about the moving walkway analogy if you didn't go there. So I'm glad that you did. Running the other way or walking quickly the other way, you're going to run into interference, right? You're going to run into those, you're moving against the tide. And I think about, so our system is made up of 8 predominantly white institutions. We do have an extraordinary HBCU in Grambling State that's in our system that truly is experiencing a renaissance now. And I think we've seen that in HBCUs across the country. It's their relevance it's always been relevant, but I think there's a wider acceptance and understanding from the new generation of just why it's such an important part of the higher ed ecosystem, if you will. But when I think about the leaders, and we're developing leaders for all of our institutions, and those even at our predominantly white institutions, there was an exchange that one of our presidents shared with me with one of his supporters, has been a supporter of the university, he said, for 38 years, who lauded the president for his leadership, but warned him not to fall prey to all this hysteria around Black Lives Matter. That it's not what it pretends to be, that there's a nefarious undercurrent there. And the president responded that he is growing increasingly, he is losing tolerance for the intolerant. Mm-hmm. And while he appreciates his support, he understands if he can no longer support the university, but he's not turning away. He's going to continue down this path. And he says his final words were, "It is what it is, and I am who I am." But this is a president who has been in higher ed for 40 years. He can see the finish line. He's there. Yeah. Most of these leaders that we're developing they're concerned with career and family. Mm-hmm. Just wondering if you have words of advice for them as they move forward as higher ed leaders when they're faced with these issues that shouldn't be controversial, divisive. We should be on the forefront. Yes.
Well, sometimes you have to educate up, as I would say. What I mean by that is that, when you're a junior faculty member, sometimes you have to help your chair understand what's going on, even though that person controls your tenure. I had a few of those conversations. When you are a dean, you have to sometimes help the president you report to have a deeper understanding of the issues. Maybe that means sharing an article, or maybe you'd like to read that book, or, if you're a president and you are a chancellor and you've got a board that is in need of a new way of understanding what it is that you're trying to do, sometimes, maybe we'll all read a book together, or, that's the value, the beauty of being at a learning institution. We can all learn together, right? And so that is one of the things. I, in my own career, have had those moments when I felt like, I really need to say something, and the person I need to say it to controls my future in some way. And so then the question is, how do you share that information in a way that they're going to be able to receive it? That the onus of doing that is, of course, on the person with the least power, right? The powerful person doesn't have to think quite so hard about what they're saying. But it is possible to, influence. I like to say, and I do say at the end of the book, we all have spheres of influence. And some of us have big spheres, and some of us have smaller spheres, but everybody influences someone. And it is also possible to influence those who have positional power that you don't, by, telling your story, sharing your narrative or somebody else's. Why is it so important? I'll give an example. This is a concrete example. I was president of Spelman for 13 years, as you mentioned, a long time. And Spelman is a historically Black college for women, and it has a motto. And the school motto is "Our Whole School for Christ." That motto comes from the fact that it was founded by two women, white women from Massachusetts. They were Christian missionaries who came to Atlanta in 1881 to start Spelman. They had this vision of creating this school for women who had recently been released from bondage, and they were, determined to do it, and they were very successful. And because of their, values and that Christian missionary background, it makes sense that they would have a motto, that it would be "Our Whole School for Christ." But fast forward to 2002, when I arrived as president, 21st century, there are a lot of students on the campus who are not Christian, and yet we want them to feel as though they also belong. And does that mean we get rid of our motto? Not necessarily, but it does mean that we have to understand our motto in a way that leaves room for people to feel part of the community. So one of the ways I wanted all of our students to feel part of the community became visible when it was time for my first graduation. Baccalaureate is taking place, and the baccalaureate service the day before graduation commencement. I don't know what the tradition is in the University of Louisiana system, but a lot of campuses have this, what is essentially a worship service, the last worship service before graduation. And it was had historically been structured as a Christian worship service. And yet not everyone sitting in the audience, parents and graduates, were Christian. And so it seemed important to me that we should include the other religious traditions in this, what should be an ecumenical experience. And so I invited the head of the Muslim Student Association to read from, we had a reading from the Old Testament and a reading from the New Testament. And then I had also a student from the Muslim Student Association reading from the Quran. And I got a few letters about that. But the fact of the matter is, as I often would say, if we want to be a school that embraces a model like Our Whole School for Christ, we have to be a school that is as welcoming as Christ was. And that we have to, having a degree from Hartford Seminary helped me a little bit there, but to say that, I had to educate the community about why it was important to do some of the things that they weren't used to doing, if we really were going to live up to who we were as an institution, who we were intended to be.
My daughter attended a small Catholic liberal arts school that was so ingrained in the diocese that it resided, that the bishop of the diocese is actually the ceremonial chancellor of the university. And at their graduation, which was decidedly a Roman Catholic graduation, we also read a passage from the Quran. And I thought it was one of the most powerful statements I had ever seen.
Yes.
And it's that demonstrated leadership. And I think that's one of the things that amongst the competencies we're trying to develop and impart to these rising leaders within our organization is one of true authentic inclusion.
Yes.
And that starts with a deep understanding, one of understanding of who we are, but two, a cultural competence that allows us to grow and develop because we're exposed to alternative views, alternative perspectives, experiential diversity and religious diversity, in addition to race diversity, demographic diversity. And that's why your book is so powerful, because it does apply to so many other conversations, right? And that's another, that as an aspiring writer, a journalism major, that's why I'm so taken with your writing, is that it's so direct and so powerful, but yet so universally applicable to so many things. And we are grateful, number one, for your work, and number two, for your time with us this evening. Now, I was given a schedule. I'm not sure how rigid we have to be with the schedule. I'm going to have to go to Jessica Leger or to Caprice to tell me if we have any liberties.
Yeah, I think we're supposed to leave now. I'm seeing a note that says.
Dr. Tatum, we'll have to have a conversation, just you and I. My dogs on cue are telling me I've talked too long. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure chatting with you. And I think this is a wonderful idea to give this opportunity to the people across the system for management development. So congratulations for that. I really, you know, put a lot of investment in investing in your people. So thank you so much for this opportunity to be a part of it and for choosing my book.
You enriched this effort immeasurably today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Jessica.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tatum. You're more than welcome to continue on with us. We are going to have a few announcements and then go into our breakout rooms, but thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you. Good night.
Good night. We'll now turn it over to Ryan.
Hi, everyone. Dr. Tatum is gone, but this is a recorded session, and I would just like to take this opportunity to thank her again for her important work and sharing her time with us this evening. Hi, all. My name is Ryan Bell. I'm the Director for Experiential Learning and Community Engagement at the University of New Orleans. I'm also a member of the second cohort of the Management and Leadership Institute. I'm here today to announce that our next book club meeting will be held on Thursday, January 21st. The book selection for January's meeting is We Cast a Shadow by New Orleans native Maurice Carlos Ruffin. When my cohort of the Management and Leadership Institute was asked to submit suggestions for the book club's next read, I leapt at the chance to nominate Mr. Ruffin's critically acclaimed novel and was thrilled when my colleagues agreed to its selection. Mr. Ruffin is a graduate of the University of New Orleans Creative Writing Workshop, a recipient of the Iowa Review Award in Fiction, as well as a winner of the William Faulkner William Wisdom Creative Writing Competition for Novel in Progress. He's currently a professor of creative writing at LSU and the 2020-2021 John and Renee Grisham Writer in Residence at Ole Miss. We Cast a Shadow is Mr. Ruffin's first novel, and has garnered an array of prestigious recognitions. It was selected as a New York Times Editor's Choice. It has been longlisted for the Center for Fiction First Novel Prize, as well as the PEN/Faulkner Award. It was named one of the best books of the year by NPR and the Washington Post for 2019. The novel is about a Black father who is desperate to shield his biracial son from the dangers that await him in an unaccepting world. The backdrop of the story is a city in the American South in the not so distant future. Its sharp and stinging similarities contemporary America, making that distance feel even shorter. I'm also excited to announce that Mr. Ruffin has graciously accepted an invitation to join us at our meeting in January and join in discussions about his book. So with that announcement, I hand the floor back to Jessica. Enjoy your discussion, and we hope to see you back in January.
Thank you, Ryan. We're really excited to continue participating in these book clubs, and the introduction was great, very intriguing.
Thank you.
And now Lynette will share with us our instructions for our breakout groups.
Thank you, Jessica. In just a few minutes, you will be asked to leave this Zoom and click on the second Zoom link which you were given, or the breakout room link, which will be provided in the chat box. This will take you into a discussion room. 3 leadership questions will guide the conversation of the breakout rooms. Each breakout room should select a spokesperson to present a 2-minute takeaway of your group's discussion for the 6:15 closing session. You will have 30 minutes in the discussion rooms. At 6:15 p.m., the rooms will be closed and you will automatically be joined with the group to finish up. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynette. I think everyone saw the message in the chat from Anne. So please go ahead and click on that. And then we will come back together for our closing at the end. So We'll see you at 6:15.